Ladies, I'm so honored that you came today. And as Roger said to Molly in Wives and Daughters, it seems so long since we last spoke. And I hope that you'll get a few things done while you listen. I usually cover three things, and we start out with our appearance or something that will mark the beginning of the day. If all you do is get a cup of tea, and I will show you my teacup for today. It kind of matches my top that I'm wearing. And I get these teacups at Home Goods or some of these other places like Marshall's where they're only, $6.99 for a set, and they're dishwasher safe, and also they're very pretty. And so if you've begun the day and you maybe need a little bit of enthusiasm for it, I would say get yourself a list or a notebook and get started with your list. And it begins with preparation. And preparation can include your bathing and dressing and getting your hair fixed. And if you wear makeup, put your face on. And whatever it is that makes you feel like you're enthusiastic about your home. And so you will need to do that, and also to have a notebook maybe like this that fits in your apron pocket. These come in sets of 3 from the Dollar Tree. And get a list here of everything that you need to do. And you can sit with your cup of tea, make your list, then go get ready, get dressed. And I always think that the day you decide you're going to lounge around and not get dressed is the day everything happens, the day you're needed to take the car somewhere or go pick somebody up or meet somebody at the door. Just all this unexpected things, they happen the day that you don't get dressed and look like you're put together. So whether or not you're expecting anyone or you think you'll see anyone, go ahead and do that, because it gives you some dignity, and you know God is there and He's watching you. He's with you. So let's do that. And I always remember the quotes that some of you send me about people in the 1800s where they had written in a little book that they have to get dressed up very special because they're going to visit the flowers and the flowers will see me. So even if you're alone, that is something you can do. If you have children, it's doubly important you get dressed up in something nice, because they will remember something you wore. I especially like colorful skirts, because a child will grab a hold of that skirt and that'll be his comfort zone for a little while. Or we talked about how memorable it is to have an apron. It's very important to have an apron. And I have one here. When I say apron, I mean one that has a like a bodice on the top. That's where you get dirty. That's where you get the flour. That's where you get all the liquid spilt on you. And I usually like to get them to match my whatever I'm wearing. And so I have several of them. And in the olden days, we had aprons that people would make an embroidery with the day of the week on them. So they had a fresh one every day. Also, there are several things that go with your preparation, and that is your appearance, your bathing, your dressing, your prayer, and a few, maybe one little exercise, one little stretch that just will kind of open up your thinking and your mind, and you can determine what that is. I have enjoyed following a few of the exercise ladies on YouTube. One of my favorites, of course, was Fabulous 50s. She has some for beginners, stretches for beginners. They're 5 minutes. But if you only had 5 minutes in the morning, you could do 5 things. You could get yourself dressed and take care of your appearance, and you could do a stretch exercise, and you could offer a prayer to God for help, and you could make your list. So there's 5 things in 5 minutes that you could do. And if you're new to homemaking, you might enjoy listening to this. I'm also a veteran homeschooler, and I like to read to you because I used to have my children come and read to me from their science book or from their history book, and we would discuss it while I was doing things that they couldn't do. Some of them were too young to do some of the kind of housework that I did. Another thing that I did was I had the children follow me around whatever I was doing, and they could if they're really young, they could have some little play equipment like a toy broom and a dustpan and follow me around and do what I did. So I want to, at first, before you go about your work, there won't be anything to see here after I do my show and tell, but I have been to a grocery store here, and I don't know what it's called in your state, but it's grocery outlet here, and it's very plain, has concrete floors. The merchandise is not always the same, but it's very interesting. And they don't sell they don't sell magazines, and they don't sell pharmaceuticals, and there's no pharmacy there, and it's pretty it's not really a bright light experience or anything, but sometimes they have some things there that are just a delight. And I had been there and found this teapot, which has a little basket in it that you can put tea leaves in it. And I've seen these when I've been on trips overseas, but I don't see them much in my part of the United States. And you can get them online. And there's a place you can go called the English Tea Store online, and it's in, I'm thinking that it might be in California, but it could be somewhere else. And I have gotten a lot of things there that I have seen in other places. Anyway, I wanted to show you what I would do is, now some people don't like to use tea bags, the bags that the tea comes in, so they break them open and they'll put them in a strainer so they won't have to use the bags because of the ingredients in the bag. So I have mint leaves here that someone gave me, and I will put them in here, and always less than you need because they'll swell. So I want to show you that, because if you want to get one, they come in other colors, but the only ones this store had left were this color. So it's in a box called Ooh La La Small Teapot if you want to get one. So when you're getting ready in the morning, you might want to put your tea in there. And I want to share with you, someone gave me a box of this, and it's by Bigelow. Bigelow and Twinings and some of these more prominent names are now really competing with interesting teas. And this is called Stress Free, and it's rose. And so here are it's a mix. It's got Tulsi, which is basil, and it has passion flower, and it has orange bits in it. Not orange bits, but apple bits in it. And it has rose blossoms and hibiscus and elderberries and raspberries. And we opened up a package during our ladies' class and saw these little things, and it's kind of delightful, but it has wonderful. When we poured it in our teacup, we got the top notes, and it was rose, very rose. And so in the ladies' Bible class, I started it out, before we got into our actual Bible reading, I started it out with the rose in the Bible. And it's mentioned once in the Bible, and it's from Song of Solomon. And I can't remember the exact verse, but it said, I am the rose of Sharon, the lily of the valley. So we sipped our rose tea while I read to them about this rose of Sharon, what kind of a flower it was. It was more of a hibiscus, and not hibiscus, but it was more of a crocus. And you can you get what is it called? It's not safflower, something else. It's if I could just have a minute here to think, it's saffron, and which is good for many things. And so we studied it, and then also because I had been a veteran homeschooler, I said, if you'll just pardon me, I just have to say this. The rose of Sharon, and the rose is only mentioned once in the whole Bible, because basically when the word rose is there, it, I guess, means other kinds of flowers. It was not the same as our rose today. But I had to mention the word homonym, because rose has a homonym, and a homonym is a word that is spelled exactly like another word. And as you know, English is a stolen language. I read you that quote about English. It's a borrowed language, and so there are other words that sometimes will be the same but have a different meaning. So it's not the same as a synonym. A synonym is a word that sounds alike, and you can remember that because it's similar in sound. It has synonym, or cinnamon sometimes I say. And so it's not a synonym. It's an homonym, meaning it's spelled exactly alike. And there are many words like that. And that might be something you want to look up, the word homonym, and see what it means. So rose, I challenge them to a homonym for rose in the Bible. And for a minute there, they couldn't quite think, and I said it is a verb. There's another rose, and it is a verb. So they guessed it and said it, he rose up and went out into the garden or something like that. And so it's a homonym. And you need to know these if you want to be homeschooling, and you'll discover them as you go along in your reading. You don't have to just do a study on it, but homeschooling is a way to discover as you live your life. And so today, if I want to start out first, as you are, see if there's anything else. Oh yes, and also at the Dollar Tree, I went in there, and there is a delightful, there are some delightful seeds, and these are called Cottage Garden. And there's all kinds there. Our seeds are always non-GMO. So I wanted to try that. I wanted to let you know. These, I think you can get 3 or 4 of them for the same price of one or something like that. So I think I've shown you everything you need to see. And so we'll move on to the morning's first cup. And someone recommended this to me. Several of you have this book. It's by Victoria Magazine, and it's called The Essential Tea Companion. I got it from Thrift Books online. You've got to be careful with any used books. Sometimes they'll have a piece of tape on it, or maybe not even as clean as you want them to be, but you can buy them new. And I do prefer to buy them new. But this was a library book, and I liked it because they put a very nice plastic cover on the covering, the flap that's covered on there. And the library books tend to have a more higher quality because they're going to be used more. So this is called Morning's First Cup. It's from the Essential Tea Companion. And I'll read you the chapters to see maybe if you would like to get one for yourself. And I think that the influence of homemaking happens sometimes when we leave a book somewhere for someone to pick up, somebody in the family to pick up, and even if all they're doing is looking at it and looking at the pictures, it has a great influence for homemaking. When we teach homemaking, we want to teach people the delights of it and not make it a grueling job to be done, to quote Jane Austen, but to make it something that we can look forward to, and it's beautiful. Many of you who were brought up, who are vital now, might have been brought up we lived in an era where children were taught in a very authoritative way, and everything was work. If go clean up the kitchen was work. But then enter the 80s, when some of us had our children, and there were various influences around us that made it more beautiful and enjoyable. And that's what we want to hand down, is the beautiful, enjoyable part of homemaking. We know some of it is going to be a grueling job to be done, but we want to make it happy, and there are so many ways to do that. So I want to read you the titles of this book, of the contents of this book. The first chapter is Getting Acquainted with Tea, and all about how to make it, and all about teacups and things like that. So then Making Time for Tea, and that is the one I'm going to read you today. And it's Morning's First Cup, A Spot of Tea with Friends, Tea on the Go. That would be interesting. Relaxing with Tea at Bedtime. And of course there are many more chapters to this, but today I'm going to read, and let me see what Tea on the Go is. See if I want to go ahead and read that to you. And if you've got something you need to do, you need to sort, something that's repetitive, something you need to get done, you can go do that while you listen. Yes, they have, and the pictures are absolutely beautiful. It shows a basket and how to loaded up with all the things you're going to need and gives you some recipes and things you could take with you. So, but I'm going to read the morning's first cup here. And that's what I suggest is you get something you like. Not everything has to be black tea. You can make anything in your teacup. And one of my favorites is the blackberries that I pick outside. And in Oregon, where I'm located right now, in Oregon, the blackberries are a nuisance and they take over. But when you go to an Oregon tourist shop, a little tiny jar of preserves or jam was extremely expensive, but I like to take them, I put them in a bag, freeze them in the freezer, and then if I need a cup of tea, put some in the bottom of the cup, pour hot water over them. Just the smell and the flavor is just wonderful. And you can add honey. I know people say honey is not proper, but in the U.S. especially, ladies like honey in their tea. Okay, so this is called Morning's First Cup. It has a wonderful picture. I'll try to remember to get that picture for you on there. Brew a cup, brew a day. Unhurriedly. The sunrise song of tea is lyrical, but with bracing undertones. Of course you can, it murmurs encouragingly. The flavor holds a tint of far lands, yet it is as familiar as the cat that comes to nuzzle your leg or sunlight on the windowsill. Oh, that cat. Somebody asked me about that cat. There was it's not really feral, but it's wild, and it hangs around outside. And I used to like to go on my Regency walks, walking down one of the farm roads quite a ways. But somehow he's told himself he can only have a certain circumference that he sits in. He sits around the outside of the house, and over by the clothesline, and over by the old truck, and he'll stay there. But so if I walk any further, he sits there and cries, and he yowls and cries and just is real noisy till I get back, and doesn't really want me out of his sight. But he won't go with me, and he doesn't like to come in the house. He's really scared. He does not like the noises of the house at all. But it's interesting. And it says here, the flavor holds a hint of far lands, yet it is as familiar as the cat that comes to nuzzle your leg or sunlight on the windowsill. And as you lift your first cup of tea and feel its warmth, the day's challenges settle into perspective. That's why I say get your cup of tea, your wee spot of tea, and sit down and make your list. And it helps your brain. It helps balance your brain to make your list. Now, I have books that I've made that have a permanent list on it that I can mark, but it does me good to write because writing creates thinking. So even if I have a list and it's preparation, breakfast, kitchen, laundry, and it's the same every day, I will go ahead and write it because it helps my brain. Writing creates thinking, I believe. Now, that might not work for you. And just remember, when you're listening to me, I'm not the authority on it. It has to work for you, for your home. Everybody has a different way of doing things, a different house to live in, a different circumstances, different kind of income, and everybody has their limitations. Some people have just a totally different lifestyle. And so it just depends on what your family's needs are. So just remember, this is a result of my observation and my experience. And I'm just trying to challenge you to create your own way at home. As long as the homemaking gets done, it doesn't really matter if it's done any particular way, but whatever suits and works best for your family. A breakfast tea implies breakfast, an important meal we're often tempted to skimp on or rush through. I like breakfast, but I like it really late. Some people have to have it really early. And it just depends, I think, on the person or on, how late you stay up, how early you get up. But those hearty, homey smells of breakfast filling the kitchen are part of morning's joy and childhood's memory. I agree. The children particularly. And I would not suggest cold cereal for children, even if it says how nutritious it is. It's not a good thing to start out on carbs like that. And so one thing that my children learned to do is to make their own. They learned very early how to put things together, even how to make a sandwich, a breakfast sandwich. That'd be more nutritious, really, and a cup of tea. Whether it's homemade, it creates childhood memories, whether it's homemade English muffins to slather with jam, or simply a bit of sugared cinnamon gilding on the toast. When you take the time to fortify yourself or your family with something special like blueberry fritters, you are making a sovereign statement. This part of the day is all about us. And yes, but at the same time, I think we have to be really careful with the sugars and carbs for your family. To emphasize the point, indulge the eye as well as the taste buds. A bedside repast with fresh flowers on a lace-lined tray, and never mind the inevitable crumbs on the quilt, is not for newlyweds alone. Try it in midlife before the stressful time of day. For some people, starting the day means wrapping hands around a favorite sturdy mug. Others see no reason to reserve the beauty of an antique cup just for guests. Whichever you might choose, there's a ritualistic comfort in using pretty objects you love that no impersonal carton or, paper cup from the corner deli can impart. Moreover, cardboard and styrofoam are, I can't really pronounce that word, but they're detrimental to the tea's subtle flavors. As you infuse your morning with the invigorating aroma of tea, you are taking a brief, quiet stand against the utilitarian world. These moments belong to serenity. Now I want to move on to more of the homemaking part, but someone asked me to discuss my sewing, and the first thing that I would do, I have this in a plastic sleeve, so I'll take it out, is I have shown this before on a previous blog post before I started doing it on broadcast and videos, is I'll draw out, and I'm not the best, but I'll draw out the ideas I have, clip a little bit of the fabric that I have stashed for it, and give myself an idea of how I want to sew. And I will post a picture of this for you and do some planning. And I also want to read to you from Linda Lichter's book. And so I'll read that to you right now, and then I'll discuss a few things that I have written on my notes here. Now, Linda Lichter's book, Simple Social Graces. If I were running any kind of a school for homemakers or anybody, she spoke against modern feminism, which isn't feminine at all. I don't know why it's named feminism, because I talk about wearing feminine clothes in the home, and I did post a picture in the previous post of the little girl's feminine clothes that could be translated to older people's feminine clothes that are just about perfect for the home. And so don't get confused about feminine and feminist, because they've misnamed that. They kind of stolen the word. And feminine just means anything that would be in contrast to masculine, anything that would be softer or more delicate, I think. That's what feminine is. And Helen Andelin talked about it in her chapter on femininity in her book, Fascinating Womanhood and the Fascinating Girl. And she talked about femininity not just in dress, but in the voice, in your mannerisms, in your attitudes, in your movements, in your household movements. And there was a poem she put there about that, and I forgot who wrote it, and he said her household movements light and fair. And so I'm going to read from Linda Lichter's book today, and I had read this previously, but some people have a real aversion to watching a movie twice. Oh, I've already seen that. Or they don't like to hear something twice, or read something twice, or attend something twice, but yet, they're listening to the same music over and over, and they do watch some of the same things, but it doesn't hurt to have it read again. And this is her chapter on the civil tongue. And the reason I wanted to include this is because to make the home have harmony in the home, we have to have a civil tongue. And the civil tongue, she says, is not just not cursing and not swearing and being careful that your language is clean, but it's also being courteous and being kind and not saying things that you shouldn't say that would hurt someone's feelings or that would be not very encouraging. So I wanted to read this because she has, and I've read this to you before in my previous broadcast. And she says, once ribald language has been sanctioned in private conversation, it soon finds its way into the public discourse. And she did mention that she thought, this was her philosophy, that once we let our language go, and that's one reason to homeschool your children, is to show them the vast amount of words there are that you can use that are good, kind, lovely, and encouraging, and build one another up with them, and how you can use them as a good thing. And she said when the language begins to deteriorate, and we also allow sometimes the public to change the meanings of our words and use language in the wrong way, because once someone gets a hold of the language, they can change the thinking of a person and can change their actions and change their behavior. So once ribald language has been sanctioned in private conversation, it soon finds its way into the public discourse. Indeed, among the arenas suffering the most from the decline of civility are those in which words have the greatest power to inflict harm. I must tell you that words have a great power to influence politics and the law. Critics note that once courtly rituals like legal depositions have degenerated into Rambo-like tactics aimed at intimidating witnesses and oppressing counsels. On the political front, the circus of TV talk shows is just a poor relation to the weekly televised shouting matches of educated journalists who know their politics but not their P's and Q's. Now, you know where P and Q came from. I believe it was called pints and quarts, and it was like an exact measurement. Critics fault these shows for promoting conflict over substance and polarizing political debate. I would add the general debasement of everyday discourse to this list. The Victorians believed in dousing angry sparks, not fanning them into an inferno. Being modern means acting or blabbing before you think and never repenting. However, in 1855, over a century before the apostles of political correctness tried to selectively censor the raw emotions that break their rules, Catherine Beecher explained that the social obligations of civility required everyone to avoid. I just want to stop here and tell you that one of the reasons we go back to the past is from a scripture that says, ask and see and look to the old paths where the good walk is, and walk therein, and you'll find rest for your souls. So it's the old ways, not the old days, but it's the principles, it's the rules, and it's the teachings of civility and the teachings of kindness. And remember, the Proverbs 31, the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. People rarely talk about that. And Catherine Beecher, she mentions here, well, she wrote articles about homemaking, and she was apparently quite influential in getting the kitchen out of the dark basements or places away from the house and lightening them up with a appliances, white walls, and having the sunlight coming through the window and making them places that were cheerful. They are also the bread, here she says, Catherine Beecher explained that the social obligations of civility required everyone to avoid following: all remarks which tend to embarrass, vex, mortify, or in any way wound the feelings of another. And I remember a etiquette book I read, and it was Judith Martin, and I've forgotten what the name of it was, but she was the author, and she came out in the 80s and wrote this really big, thick book on etiquette. And I think every 10 years there ought to be one, because there are new things invented and new ways to do things that we should learn to be polite at. And one of the things she said is, someone asked, what do you do in this book when someone says something that just mortifies you? In other words, it's just like, some question or some comment that is so inappropriate or embarrassing or requires you to reveal something about yourself or others that you don't want to. She says you just look at them and you say, why would you ask such a thing? And of course, most of us are too timid to say something like that. But it says, avoid all remarks which tend to embarrass, vex, mortify, or in any way wound the feeling of another. And one of the things I've had a problem with over the years, and I never corrected anybody, but I named my daughter a name, and when I introduce her, and it's a simple name, I pronounce it and tell them, and somebody over the years, now and then, someone has changed it. Like, I'm just going to call you such and such. Well, that really hurts the feelings of a mother who went through labor, not only labor to bear the child, but then, 20 or more years labor to bring them up and to instill values in them. And someone thinks they have the liberty to change their name or change the pronunciation of the name. To me, that vexes me, and that wounds my feelings and her feelings. And I tried to bring it up once in a while, but you don't go around correcting people all the time. Kind of just act like I don't notice it. We just let it pass by. But lately, as I've become more vital, I have felt a little more brave. And I did correct somebody gently, and I showed them how it was spelled and showed them that it was pronounced the way it was spelled. And but some people are just not going to change. They like their own ideas, and they'll call people by their names and by the names they want them to be, or pronounce it the way they want to. There are just some people like that. To notice personal defects, she says, avoid that. To notice personal defects, to allude to others' faults or the faults of their friends, to speak disparagingly of the sect or party to which a person belongs, to be inattentive when addressed in conversation, to contradict flatly. Boy, I could talk to you about that. Hasty, sharp replies. Contradicting, one of the favorite lines of a contradictor is, the minute you say something, they say, not all the time. Well, that's not true all the time. Not everybody. And not everything, and that is just one of their favorite things to say. And to the sensitive person, that can be quite vexing. To be inattentive when addressed in conversation, to contradict flatly. No, it's not. If you watch children in your home, the disagreements and the fights that they have are largely because of the tongue. And they'll be playing, and somebody will say, this car is going to the store, and the other one say, no, it's not. And then they start an argument and spoil the fun of the person who's just having an enjoyable time, relaxing his brain. And it's so important. Play is so important in destroying their playtime by saying, no, it's not, no, you can't. And that is very defeating. We're supposed to build one another up, the Bible says. And it's a very good teaching moment. To speak in contemptuous tones of opinions expressed by another, all these are violations of the rules of good breeding. They are also the bread and butter of attack TV, she says. And she says the poisonous music and the scorchingly candid everyday atmosphere of our offices, homes, and streets that keep daily life on the verge of boiling over. And there was a lady once that was in one of our ladies' Bible classes, and she was bemoaning the fact that many women, when they get together, talk about things they ought not to talk about. And there'll be young girls sitting around, and there will be other people, and they will talk about bodily functions like just about everything. Your surgeries, your heart, your liver, your kidneys, women's bodily functions, and things that are embarrassing for young people to listen to, or maybe they even talk about it in front of men. And so we need to be refined, and the Bible does say be refined, and the Bible does say be courteous. And so we need to be very careful to keep our speech pure and lovely and seasoned with grace. Whereas we celebrate the forthright rudeness of shock and tell it like it is politicians, the Victorians condemned brassy behavior. See, she always is, in this book, Simple Social Graces, she's comparing the Victorian era and their sensibilities to the modern era. And she doesn't speak very highly of the modern era. But we can change that in our homes, home by home. Our little home can be a place that is very different. And we don't want to be like the world. And it will be a lonely journey, but you will grow from it, and life will become so much more meaningful and beautiful. Whereas we celebrate the forthright rudeness of shock and tell it like it is, politicians, the Victorians condemned brassy behavior as a barbaric lack of restraint. And see, restraint is taught all the way through this book because that's the way the Victorians were. And I did read to you previously that restraint was mocked even in their time. They said they were these people are so restrained, the civilization is so restrained that they can't even live up to their own guides. Even if one was able to win an argument with lungs and intimidation, could never justified should. One etiquette writer scolded those skilled at sarcasm, barbs, and contempt. Because you happen to have a razor in your possession, that is no reason why you should be allowed to cut the throats of the rest of us who are unarmed. I just love that. If I were to write an etiquette book, I would just write that as one of those interesting quotes. You know how people will put the bottom at the top of a page as an interesting little quote, and they'll put a little decorative square around it. That would be a good one. Because you happen to have a razor in your possession, that is no reason why you should be allowed to cut the throats of the rest of us who are unarmed. Well, you could say the same thing about people who constantly, brazenly, hasty, sharp replies, contradictions that put a knife in people's emotions when they're just trying to say something nice and they cut them off or say something that contradicts it. That's the same thing as having a weapon while the rest of them are unarmed. Over a century later, one of these authors noticed how the Darwinian deck is stacked in today's verbal wars, writing in the aforementioned article that opposition also limits information. Opposition limits information when only those who are adept at verbal sparring take part in public discourse, and those who cannot handle it or do not like it decline to participate. Yeah, just silences the rest of us, rather just kind of shrink back when some people who think they're pretty smart start talking, and no one feels that they can converse with them because they don't really want to spar and they don't really want to talk about unpleasant things. See, but it's all promoted as very intelligent. The rest of us, homemakers, we're not intelligent, they think, because we want to talk about our recipes or we want to talk about our children, or like things that I'm talking about today. But when you find out how many homemakers are also homeschoolers, you better not underestimate them. It's a mistake. They're quiet and they tolerate a lot, but it's a mistake to push them too far, because they can bring down the government if you push them too far. If they feel threatened with their their children, their husbands, their homemaking, their homes, and their responsibility. If you interfere with that, watch out, because then they might be quite outspoken, and then the other person won't have a weapon that's equal. So she says, can we truly have a democracy when our public and private discourse is dominated by bullies? Now, she calls it a democracy. We are a constitutional republic, and that means that we live by a law. And so no matter who's president, even the president has to obey the Constitution. And that's what we live by. And the politicians are all there to protect the Constitution, not to push their own stuff on us. Blowhards did not fare so well 100 years ago. She talked about in one of these chapters, then I forgot what the name of it was quite amusing. She said you didn't have to call the police if people were threatening you or bullying you, because the men would just take them outside behind the barn and tar and feather them. And if you tarred and feathered somebody, it meant that you poured this sticky black substance all over them and threw feathers on them. And then for them to find their way home would be difficult because they wouldn't want anyone to see them. I suppose today it would not work that way, would it? Blowhards did not fare so well 100 years ago. The Victorians disapproved of people routinely rumbling like thunder. Now, who was it in one of the Jane Austen stories that said he disapproves of something or other? I remember that remark. They disapproved of people routinely rumbling like thunder. It was considered selfish, divisive, undignified, and therefore uncivilized, but it was also considered counterproductive. If you've got a problem, being, rumbling like thunder, what I would suggest you do is have a good look at yourself and say, like as David said in Psalms, Lord, put a seal on my lips. It's just best to be quiet. Also, you get a lot more respect if you're quiet. People don't laugh at you or take you too lightly. If you're quiet, they seem to think you have some intelligence. So teach your children to be quiet. They could do a lot of things without talking. To be convincing, remarked Lord Chesterfield, always state your opinions modestly and coolly. And that's why it'd be nice if you had a little class that you would maybe make up a phrase that would potentially inflame someone. We used to do this in our home when our kids were teenagers. Make up a phrase that would potentially inflame someone and test them to see how they could answer, so that they would come across as modestly and coolly. And one of the things we did when I was teaching speech to my children was when it was their turn to make a speech, the rest of us would yawn and roll our eyes and look out the window and stuff. And the speaker had to stay on the subject and try to get us back and not get discouraged. And he said later on, when he was in his 40s, that was one of the best training he ever had, is not to get discouraged by the audience. Losing your temper meant losing more than self-control. A man who does not possess himself enough to hear disagreeable things without visible marks of anger and change of countenance is at the mercy of every artful knave. That's interesting. It's at the mercy of the person who's perpetrating it, because they know that they can get some kind of response from you that makes some people happy to make other people unhappy, doesn't it? Cool-headed civil discourse may not play as well as the Nielsen ratings as getting one's nose broken in a discussion that has deteriorated into a brawl, but we sorely need to return to it if we are to solve any of our serious problems as a society. If we gave all ranters the Victorian treatment, stony silence, they would be forced to pipe down or be turned out. I like that because where does this all begin? I would say that probably 100% of the problems that go on in the public or in Congress are a result of your early home training. If you're turned out of the home first thing in the morning to go to be educated by someone else or somewhere else, they're not going to teach you this except by force. And yes, you will learn some manners. You know, you're not allowed to hit or spit or talk bad to somebody in a school, but it has more deep effect on a child when he's taught it at home. And because you'll be told that it's a builder for you. It builds them up. It builds up their personality, and they can grow in goodness and grow in caring about others. And there's just more to it than just doing it like in a military style, which is part of the public schools. And then she has a little chapter here called No More Secrets. Part of the reason we develop our high-volume style is our sadly mistaken notion that intensity, bluntness, and lack of reticence denote sincerity. So you can look up that word. It's your assignment. Reticence. R-E-T-I-C-E-N-C-E. Talk show audiences doubt that dysfunctional guests have truly recovered unless tears flow. I always remembered Mary Englebright. She wrote, "Let's put the fun back in dysfunctional." And it has the word fun in it, doesn't it? So people call you if you're a normal person, there was an era just a few years ago where you'd be called dysfunctional because you weren't out making all the mistakes and wrecking your life the way other people were. So they thought you were the dysfunctional person. Talk show audiences doubt that dysfunctional guests have truly recovered unless tears flow. And there are some people who will say, "I need to talk to you," and they are not going to quit until they've got you crying. So you've got to remember that this is their goal. And reconciling parties are required to produce hugs and kisses. We applaud the honesty of best-selling memoirs that lay bare every dark family secret, from alcoholism and more. Until fairly recently, mothers taught their children, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. That's why I think that young people should immerse themselves in all the Jane Austen and the Elizabeth Gaskell that they can, all the movies that were ever made about it with these quotes in them. Marianne, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. When I lamented the decline of this maternal wisdom, one devoted mother replied, "Then no one today would ever say anything." Yeah, that's true. Also, I'll read a little bit more. Tasteless public humor. If we aren't demanding that people spill their deepest secrets to the general public, we are finding other ways to democratize ourselves by dropping our standards of public speech down to the lowest common denominator. And I think some of us who were taught by our parents not to use the vernacular, not to use much slang, our parents never objected to figures of speech, but they had to be clean because figures of speech even could get vulgar. But some of us feel intimidated by the more crude people, so we don't want to come up as being too highfalutin and too conceited, and it's difficult sometimes. And so we drop our values down a little bit more in our manners just to make them comfortable, And especially, I think, it's easy for a homemaker to do it because she doesn't want anyone to think that she's not tolerant for some reason. Perhaps the saddest sign of our corrupted discourse is the willingness of self-described conservatives to adopt the tastelessness and rudeness that would have appalled their ideological forebears. And she mentions some of them here by name. And so she has a little poem here that was very common in Victorian times. Not that Victorians didn't appreciate humor, but even legends were not excused when they broke the cardinal law best summarized by the late 19th century poet Will Carleton. Careful with fire is good advice, we know. Careful with words is 10 times doubly so. And you know, in the book of James, the tongue, speech, when it's talking about the tongue, it means speech, is referred to as a fire. And once it gets going, it's hard to put out. Okay, so I'll talk to you about another thing, and then I'm going to read one more thing from Brian Kozlowski's book on the Jane Austen diet. And that is the question. I had a comment recently that said they wanted me to talk a little bit about the family and how they were from a dysfunctional family and how to, talk about children and babies and teenagers and that sort of thing. But so the first thing that caught my eye was this word, I was from a broken home or dysfunctional family. How did it get dysfunctional? So that's where I go. First of all, that you can very easily solve a lot of problems and prevent having to fight the world all the time, is to home educate your own family, home educate your own children. Don't send them out there to the world, because they'll come home and then you're going to be fighting the philosophy that comes home with them, and which is usually just challenging authority, challenging the parents, insulting, and what we're talking about, civility and words, speech, is to educate them at home. Now, a lot of people will object to this, and they will say, well, we should send them a place where education happens, send them to the institution where this happens, just like you go to the grocery store to get groceries. You send people, but that's what's called outsourcing your authority and outsourcing your parenthood. But if you can keep them home and keep them also as far away from the street as possible, separate them from, remember in the Bible where it talks about Lot and how he pitched his tent towards the city. Well, of course, his children would see the lights at night, and they would smell the food, and they would hear the music, and it's very attractive and compelling. So a lot of people have moved away from even neighborhoods because they want to keep their kids as far away from the street as possible and be able to have the influence on them that they want. And your homeschooling is your best influence, and it's not a big deal. As I've said before, there are 26 letters in the alphabet with 44 sounds. You can get flashcards that show all those sounds, and you can get things that show how to put those words together. And you can also make it beautiful and fun and a wonderful experience. And just teach as you go, and also pay attention to what the children need, what's best for them. But that is almost 100% of your problem of being a dysfunctional home. How did it get dysfunctional? Well, when you get up in the morning and you send the whole family somewhere else during the day, they're not going to properly bond. They're not going to have the respect and for authority and for their home. And they're also going to be a little detached and maybe in a fog. And while we want people to be independent, the family was put there by God to where you can develop your own tastes and your own beliefs, your own religious beliefs into your own family. You have a right to do that. So the first thing you can do that is very helpful is to keep them home and limit. I was talking to one lady about homeschooling. She'd been a homeschooler, and she said, but I did have, she said, I did have my reservations about friends, because when they got with a friend, even if it was a homeschooler, they would develop habits and beliefs and things that I didn't approve of. So she said if I had to do it over again, I would make it totally homeschool and not so much socialization until in their developing years. You want them to be like you and like the family. And this is where you grow, is because you may think, I can't teach my children. Because they will develop the habits you have, and you know it. I have too many flaws. I have too many bad habits. I want to send them to a professional. But what it does for you is it helps you grow. You stop doing the things that you don't want the habits and things you don't want your children to pick up. And so then you start to grow and you start to improve. So I would say that there are two things that I can tell you that would maybe solve all your, and I want to make you autodidactic or self-taught, and you look up and figure these things out for yourself. So I'm not going to tell you every detail of how to have a functional family. You're all going to be dysfunctional now and then. There's all going to be some of this stuff now and then. But if you can stay under one roof and always remember your obligation to God, and if children can remember that their parents are brothers and sisters in Christ too, and the brothers and sisters as well, that your conscience won't let you have a dysfunctional home because you want to please God. And so there's two scriptures I can give you, and one is in the Old Testament and one is the New Testament. And the one in the Old Testament is Deuteronomy 6:6-8, or probably more. Probably just read the whole chapter of Deuteronomy 6, because it's the one that says, it addresses parents. And it says, you shall teach your children as you walk and as you talk and as you sit by the way, as you sit in your house and as you lie down, as you go out. And so if you are sending your children somewhere else, you can't do any of that, because you've got them in somebody else's house all day, so to speak, getting indoctrinated by them. So then Ephesians 6. So there's two sixes, Deuteronomy 6 and Ephesians 6. And Ephesians 6 is just really kind. It says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. That you honor your father and your mother, that you may live long on the earth, and that all may go well with you, and that you may live long on the earth. That's a really loaded sentence there. So it's Deuteronomy 6 and Ephesians 6, and you figure out how you're going to live like that. You could even develop a curriculum based on those two chapters, and figure out what you want to get to ennoble it and emphasize it. Maybe I can speak more about this later, but just remember not to outsource your authority. You have a right to raise your children the way you want to, and teach them your religion, and teach them your language and your figures of speech and your heritage, and you're not going to get that if they are in somebody else's institution all day long. Plus, it creates conflict. Most children, and those of you who are vital like I am, you went through the 1940s and 1950s school, and how it breaks up, it detaches your mind from who you are, from the family. It totally, I would say it's a soul snatcher. It just totally sucks your brain out to think about something else than the home and the family. And you'll say, oh yeah, I was still real close to my family and everything. But it could be better than that. It could be very rich. And you could get your education at home, and then there's a bonding there that can't be broken. And I have talked about this before, and I quoted someone, and I found another quote too. I'll try to see if I can find that, where an educator in the 1800s said, "We don't want a society full of thinkers and believers. We just want people who are workers. They just want to make slaves out of all of us, and that way they will think for us. So I'm going to stop my ranting and raving about this, but I want to read out of Brian Kozlowski's book, because he had the Jane Austen diet. He had a bit about sleeping and how important sleeping is. And I have read it to you before, but I'm thinking about it more, so I wanted to read this. And it says, Mr. Woodhouse, that's from Emma, instructs us to keep reasonable hours at night, avoiding stressful work after it gets dark. Now, there is a scripture, I don't have it handy, and it says, why do you work late at night and rise up extra early in the morning, trying to be eating what was it called, eating the bread of sorrows, or the laboring, for God giveth his beloved sleep. And some of the original language of that indicated that God blesses people even while they're sleeping, and how important sleep is. And this is one reason to have your children at home, so that they can sleep as long as they need. And teenagers especially need more sleep. And so, because it renews cells and builds the brain and prevents depression. So, let's read about this. Mr. Woodhouse instructs us to keep reasonable hours at night, avoiding stressful work after it gets dark. Few things are so serious that you can't tackle tomorrow with fresh hopes and fresh schemes. That's a quote from Jane Austen. And while the occasional late night out is perfectly admissible in Austen world, Jane's characters are usually in bed by 10 o'clock. I think they were in bed much earlier, especially in the winter. And once in bed, recreate the deeper darkness of Regency nights. After her candle snuffs out, darkness, impenetrable and immovable, filled Catherine's bedroom in Northanger Abbey. So close tight your curtains and get rid of any unwanted beams of electric light, even the blue glow from the alarm clocks. And that's another thing. If you will keep your children home, and it's never too late to get them home, and educate them yourself, you don't use alarm clocks. Because eventually, and also they'll be sick less, because eventually they'll wake up when their body clock tells them to wake up. And the seasons and the air will have a different effect on them. If they're closed up all day in a public school, it's going to have a different effect on their health. Remember, in one of these chapters, Brian Kozlowski quoted one of Jane Austen's characters saying, or maybe it was Jane herself, I'm very fond of standing in front of an open window. And it's been rather wet outside here, and so that's what I've been doing. I didn't want to go outside, so I opened a window and stood in front of it so that I could get my good things, the good things that comes from that. Even if your eyes are closed, the photoreceptors on your skin can pick up any ambient light in the room, suppressing melatonin and affecting the overall restfulness of your sleep. And here's another quote from one of her books. I would not have you sleep in such an error for the world. If nothing else, Austen compels us to remember the easiest nature prescription at our disposal. Simply looking at it does a body good. Nature. Nature puts things in proper perspective, reminding us to take a breath, that despite the daily terrors of life, the earth is still turning and everything will be okay. Gazing at starlight at night does it for Fanny Price. And he goes on to describe that experience. I feel, I'll just go on here. Gazing at starlight does it for Fanny Price. When I look out on such a night as this, she says, I feel as if there could be neither wickedness nor sorrow in the world, and there certainly would be less of both if the sublimity of nature were more attended to and people were carried more out of themselves by contemplating such a scene. You remember I had read about in the nature chapter here about how they thought in Regency era, and others too, that they were obligated to go out, walk around their own area, their own yard, their own property, and appreciate the things that were growing, the trees, whatever. And many poems have been written about this. they thought they were obligated to do that. Just go and look at it. I think most people today feel they're obligated to catch a sale and to shop. We're obligated to go and appreciate this opportunity. Fanny, you're a genius. Researchers have discovered that nature is such a powerful restorative, even looking at nature scenes can fire up the dopamine reward system in our brains, increasing feelings of wellness, positive thoughts, and greater drive to form emotional connections with others. Remember in Wives and Daughters, some of you that have the DVD set, when Mr. Gibson told, was it Lady Cumnor, go outside and get some fresh air, just a little. And so that's what I would suggest to you is get some fresh air, do a stretch, do something like that, and don't stay in a stuffed up area, because it will also make you think you're crazy. So, because it does something to your mind. So ladies, I have used up any time that I have now, and as I said before, I always hope to get here more often. And so you must be praying for me so that I can do that. And thank you for all you do for me. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your emails. And some of you have sent me a card or two, and I appreciate your support. And I would like to say that I hope you get a lot done while you listen today. And I'll talk to you later. God bless you. Stay close to Christ. Bye.